The day Victoria Caldwell fired me, she looked me straight in the eyes and said, "We're restructuring the department. That's corporate speak for, you're not worth keeping." What she didn't know was that I owned 40% of the company. Her father built. No name on the door, no seat at the executive table, just silent ownership of the empire she thought was hers to command. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I still remember the day I met James Caldwell. It wasn't in a gleaming office building or at some elite networking event. It was at a rundown coffee shop near the community college where I taught business part-time while building my consulting portfolio. He was just another middle-aged man in a wrinkled suit, notepad filled with calculations and a desperate look in his eyes. His medical equipment startup was 3 months from bankruptcy, and he needed a miracle. "Miss Chen, everyone says you're the person to talk to when a business is on life support," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "I've tried everything. Banks won't extend our credit, investors are pulling out, and my team is jumping ship." I opened the folder and saw potential beneath the disaster. Meridian Medical had innovative technology but catastrophic financial management. "Your company isn't dying, Mr. Caldwell. It's just being mismanaged to death." That was 15 years ago. Before I poured my inheritance and every waking hour into saving Meridian. Before I restructured their debt, secured their patents, and expanded their market reach. Before I agreed to remain invisible as the company's silent partner, because James insisted that clients in the medical field preferred traditional leadership structures. In other words, they wanted a man as the face of the company, not an Asian American woman barely in her 30s with no medical background. I accepted those terms because I believed in the technology. Meridian's portable dialysis systems could change lives. And they did, just not mine. As Meridian grew from a struggling startup to an industry leader worth billions, my role remained the same: the shadow advisor, the unnamed partner, the woman behind the curtain. I didn't mind at first. I had influence where it mattered and a growing bank account. I had James's respect, if not public acknowledgement. And I had the satisfaction of building something that mattered. But shadows get tired of the dark eventually. Every company event, I sat in the back row. Every press release mentioned James Caldwell's visionary leadership. Every industry award went to him while I watched from home. When Forbes featured Meridian in their Companies Transforming Healthcare issue, James stood proudly on the cover. I was cropped out of the single photo where I had appeared in the background. "It's just business," James would say whenever I brought it up. "The public needs a single face to associate with the company. You're still getting your share of the profits. Isn't that what matters?" For years, I convinced myself that it was. Until Victoria happened. Victoria Caldwell breezed into Meridian like she owned the place, because technically, she did. Or, at least, she owned the 35% her father had given her upon her graduation from business school. The remaining ownership was split between me at 40% and James at 25%. But Victoria didn't know about my shares. Nobody did except James and the company. Lawyers. Our agreement was locked in a private contract that kept my name off public records. When James announced he was stepping back from day-to-day operations, appointing Victoria as the new chief operations officer, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Victoria was 27, had 2 years of experience at a consulting firm, and possessed all the humility of someone who'd never failed at anything in her life. "Sophia will show you the ropes," James told her during her first executive meeting. "She's been with the company since the beginning." That was the only acknowledgement of my 15 years building his empire. To Victoria, I was just another middle manager, another employee to command, another name on the organizational chart without a corner office. I tried to guide her gently at first. "The R&D department needs more autonomy. They're our innovation engine, and the current approval process is slowing them down." "Thanks for your input," Victoria said with a practiced smile that never reached her eyes. "But I've been studying organizational efficiency models, and what they actually need is more structure, not less." 3 months later, our head of R&D resigned, taking 2 senior engineers with him. 6 months later, our innovation pipeline was empty for the first time in a decade. I tried again. "The distribution contract with Northern Healthcare is up for renewal. We should renegotiate. They're paying 2018 prices for 2023 technology." Victoria tilted her head slightly, the way people do when they're pretending to consider your opinion while already dismissing it. Actually, I've been looking at the numbers, and I think we should focus on volume with them. Keeping them happy with favorable pricing now will pay off long term. What she didn't know was that I had negotiated the original contract. I knew Northern's budget had increased by 30% since then. They were expecting a price increase and had already factored it into their financial projections. When the new contract was signed without any price adjustment, Northern's purchasing director actually called me, confused. We'd budgeted for at least a 15% increase. Is everything okay with your cost structure? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. We left millions on the table because Victoria couldn't admit that someone else might know more than her. And still, I tried to help. I compiled reports, provided historical context, offered suggestions. Victoria took my documents, ignored my advice, and presented my data as her own discoveries in executive meetings. James noticed the company's declining performance but blamed market conditions, regulatory challenges, anything but his daughter's leadership. When I tried to discuss it with him privately, he became defensive. Victoria is finding her footing. She's got excellent instincts, she just needs time and support. You of all people should understand the value of mentoring the next generation. I did understand mentoring. What I didn't understand was watching someone dismantle everything I'd built because they refused to listen. For 15 years, I had been the company's backbone while James was its face. Now Victoria was its wrecking ball. The day before she fired me, I sent her a detailed analysis of our declining market share in 3 key regions, with specific recommendations to reverse the trend. It was comprehensive, data-driven, and represented weeks of work. The next morning, she called me into her office. I've been reviewing the department's performance, Victoria said, not even glancing at my report sitting unopened on her desk. And I've concluded that we need to streamline our operational structure. I knew what was coming. I'd seen this playbook before, usually when executing layoffs for other companies during my consulting days. The irony wasn't lost on me. We're eliminating your position, she continued, her voice clinically professional. Your responsibilities will be distributed among the existing team. Human Resources has prepared a separation package that includes 2 months severance and continuation of benefits through the end of the quarter. 15 years reduced to 2 months pay and some temporary health insurance. Is there a specific reason? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. My performance reviews have been consistently excellent. Victoria shifted slightly, the only sign that my question had made her uncomfortable. It's not personal, Sophia. It's a structural decision. The company is moving in a new direction, and we're consolidating certain roles. I nodded slowly, knowing the real reason. I was the last person in the executive team who remembered the old Meridian, who knew how things worked before Victoria arrived. I was the only one who still challenged her decisions, who still brought up alternatives when she declared her way was best. I was the only evidence that her innovative strategies were often just repackaged versions of things we'd tried years ago. I was inconvenient. So I had to go. I cleaned out my desk while Victoria's assistant watched, a company policy for terminated employees that I'd actually helped implement years ago. The irony was almost amusing. Almost. As I carried my box of personal items through the office, I saw the pitying glances, the quickly averted eyes, the hushed conversations that stopped when I walked by. These people had been my colleagues for years, some for over a decade. Now I was a cautionary tale. There goes Sophia. She disagreed with the boss's daughter, and look what happened. James wasn't even in the office that day. A convenient business trip had taken him to London, safely away from having to watch his daughter fire the woman who had saved his company. I wondered if that was intentional or just fortunate timing. I didn't cry until I got to my car. Even then, it wasn't the heaving sobs of someone whose world had just collapsed. It was the quiet tears of someone who finally accepted a truth they'd been denying for too long. I had built my life around a company that had never truly been mine. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by industry awards with James's name on them, press clippings that never mentioned me, and the original business plan for Meridian that I had written by hand 15 years ago. I thought about the 40% ownership stake that Victoria didn't know about. I thought about the board meeting scheduled for next month, where my shares would give me voting power. I thought about all the ways I could reclaim what was rightfully mine. And then I remembered something my grandmother told me before she died, leaving me the inheritance that I'd invested in Meridian. Power that needs to announce itself isn't real power. Real power works quietly, like water shaping stone. Patient. Persistent. Unstoppable. I didn't need to storm back into Meridian demanding recognition. I didn't need to publicly humiliate Victoria or force James to acknowledge my contributions. I had spent 15 years building something valuable. Now I could decide what to do with that value. I opened my laptop and typed a simple email to James: "We need to talk. Not as colleagues. As partners." His response came within minutes. "Despite the time difference in London, I heard what happened. It wasn't my decision. Can we discuss when I return?" Too little, too late. I didn't want a discussion. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted respect. And after 15 years of waiting for it to be offered, I realized I needed to claim it for myself. The next morning, I contacted Meridian's corporate counsel, who, unlike Victoria, was very aware of my ownership stake. "I'd like to review my options as a major shareholder," I said. "And I'd prefer this conversation remain confidential for now." Margaret Chen had been Meridian's lawyer since the beginning. She was one of the few people who knew my true role in the company. "This has been a long time coming," she said, not bothering to hide her approval. "What exactly did you have in mind?" What did I have in mind? I wasn't sure yet. Revenge felt too small, too petty for what I'd invested. This wasn't about hurting Victoria or punishing James. This was about finally stepping out of the shadows I had allowed myself to be relegated to. This was about reclaiming my place in the story of Meridian, not as a footnote, but as a co-author. "I want options," I told Margaret. "All of them. From maintaining the status quo to complete divestment and everything in between." "Including taking control?" she asked. I paused, the possibility settling over me like a new coat, unfamiliar but not uncomfortable. "Yes," I said finally. "Including that." Over the next week, while James was still abroad and Victoria was busy implementing her new direction for the company, Margaret prepared a comprehensive overview of my position. As a 40% shareholder with specific rights outlined in our original agreement, I had more leverage than even I had realized. The company bylaws, which I had helped write but hadn't reviewed in years, included a clause that major strategic changes required approval from shareholders representing at least 60% of the company. Victoria's new direction qualified as a major strategic change. Her 35% plus her father's 25% gave them 60%, exactly the threshold needed. But there was a complication. James had granted me proxy voting rights for 10% of his shares years ago as part of a complicated tax strategy. I had forgotten about it, apparently, so had he. That meant Victoria and James effectively controlled only 50% of the voting rights. I controlled the other 50%. A deadlock. Nothing could move forward without my approval. When James returned from London, he came directly to my apartment rather than the office. He looked older than when he'd left, the lines around his eyes deeper. His shoulders slightly stooped. "You should have told me you were thinking of restructuring the executive team," I said as he settled onto my couch. "I wasn't thinking of it," he admitted. "Victoria made that decision while I was handling the European expansion. She had the authority, she's the COO. She has the title," I corrected. "But not the authority to make unilateral decisions about senior leadership. Not according to our operating agreement." James ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Sophia, I know you're upset, and you have every right to be. Victoria overstepped. I've already told her as much. We can fix this. Come back to Meridian. I'll create a new position for you, reporting directly to me instead of Victoria." I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That's not going to work this time, James. What do you want, then? More money? A different title? Tell me how to make this right." It was the same conversation we'd had countless times over the years, just with higher stakes. James always willing to offer concessions that maintained the status quo while appearing to address my concerns. More money but no recognition. A better title but no actual authority. The illusion of progress without any real change. "I want what I've earned," I said simply. "Equal recognition for equal contribution. My name alongside yours when the company's history is discussed. A public acknowledgement of my role as co-founder and my ongoing position as major shareholder and board member." James's expression darkened. "You know why we structured things the way we did. The industry wasn't ready 15 years ago," I interrupted. "The industry wasn't ready 15 years ago. And maybe that was true then. But it's not true now. And it's not just about the industry, is it? It's about you. About the story you tell yourself and others about Meridian's success. Your success." He didn't respond immediately, which told me I'd hit the mark. Finally, he sighed. What happens? If I say no? Then I exercise my rights as a shareholder. I call for a vote of no confidence in the current leadership. With my shares plus my proxy rights to 10% of yours, I can force a reorganization of the executive team. You destroy everything we've built? His voice rose. Over what? Wounded pride. No, I said calmly. I'd protect what we've built. From being destroyed by Victoria's inexperience and your unwillingness to check her worst impulses. Meridian is losing market share, James. Innovation has stalled. Key personnel are leaving. These aren't my opinions, these are facts. Facts that Victoria ignores and you excuse. She's learning, he insisted. At what cost? How much damage should Meridian sustain for Victoria's education? The company employs over 2,000 people. Their livelihoods matter more than Victoria's. Journey of self-discovery as an executive. That struck home. Whatever his blind spots regarding his daughter, James had always cared about Meridian's employees. It was one of the things I respected about him. What are you proposing, exactly? He asked, his voice quieter now. A restructuring, a real one, not the kind Victoria implemented. You remain as CEO if you want, focusing on what you do best: vision, client relationships, public presence. I step in as president and COO, with Victoria reporting to me as VP of Strategic Initiatives, where she can learn the business properly without endangering its stability. She won't accept that. Then she can leave with a generous severance package and start fresh somewhere else, without the burden of trying to fill your shoes at Meridian. James was silent for a long moment. And if I refuse these terms? Then I call for that vote of no confidence. I marshal support from the board members who are watching our stock price fall. I present evidence of Victoria's mismanagement. And I force the issue. You'd really do that? I met his gaze steadily. I've given 15 years to Meridian, James. I've stayed in the shadows, let you take the credit, watched you hand my life's work to your daughter without even consulting me. So yes, I would really do that. Not out of spite, but because someone needs to protect what we built. He stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the city skyline where Meridian's headquarters dominated the view. I wondered what he saw when he looked at that building. His legacy? His daughter's inheritance? Or maybe, just maybe, he saw what I saw, a shared creation that deserved better than to become a casualty of family dynamics. I need time to think, he said finally. You have 48 hours. After that, I call for an emergency board meeting. He turned back to me, a strange mixture of anger and respect in his expression. You know, in some ways, you remind me of Victoria. That same determination. No, I said softly. Victoria inherited her position. I earned mine. That's the difference you've never understood. After James left, I poured myself a glass of wine and returned to the window, looking out at the Meridian building that had been the center of my professional life for so long. Whatever happened next would change everything, for me, for James, for Victoria, for the company itself. I thought about the day Victoria fired me, how certain she had been of her power, how dismissive of mine. I remembered the way she'd looked past me when I asked for a reason, already moving on to the next item on her agenda. She had no idea what was coming. Neither did James, really. For 15 years, I had been the quiet force behind Meridian's success, the invisible partner, the shadow architect of its growth. I had accepted that role because I believed in what we were building. But now it was time to step into the light. Not with a shout, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knows exactly what they're worth. The next morning, as promised, I gave James 48 hours to consider my proposal. I spent those 2 days preparing, reviewing financial reports, speaking with board members, documenting Victoria's decisions and their impacts. On the second day, I received a text from James. Can we meet at the office? 7 p.m., after hours. I arrived at Meridian at exactly 7 p.m. The main office was deserted, the usual bustle of activity replaced by the quiet hum of electronics and the occasional sound of the cleaning crew in distant hallways. James was waiting in the boardroom, but he wasn't alone. Victoria sat beside him, her posture rigid, her expression a careful mask of professional detachment. So he had told her. Interesting. Sophia, James said, standing as I entered. Thank you for coming. I took a seat across from them, placing my portfolio on the table. James. Victoria. Victoria didn't acknowledge me directly. She stared at a point just past my shoulder, as if looking at me would somehow validate my presence. I've discussed the situation with Victoria, James began. She was surprised to learn about your ownership stake in Meridian. I imagine so, I said, keeping my voice neutral. It's not information that was ever shared with her. That was my decision. James added quickly. Not Sophia's. Victoria finally looked at me, her gaze sharp with accusation. Were you planning this all along? Getting fired so you could swoop in and take control? I met her gaze calmly. No, Victoria. I was planning to continue doing what I've always done, helping Meridian succeed. Your decision to fire me simply accelerated a conversation that was long overdue. A conversation about what, exactly, she demanded. About recognition. About respect. About the future of this company. James cleared his throat. I've explained to Victoria that your concerns about Meridian's current direction have merit. The quarterly numbers support your assessment. Victoria's jaw tightened. But she didn't argue. The numbers were difficult to dispute. I've also explained that we need to find a solution that works for all parties, James continued. One that addresses your legitimate grievances while also preserving Victoria's role in the company. I raised an eyebrow. And what solution? Have you arrived at? James slid a folder across the table. A counterproposal. You return to Meridian as Executive Vice President of Operations, reporting directly to me. Victoria remains as COO but focuses on client relationships and business development, areas where her skills are most valuable. You would have authority over R&D, production, and strategic planning. And public recognition of my role and contributions? I asked. A press release announcing your new position would acknowledge your 15 years with the company and your instrumental role in its growth. Your bio would be added to the leadership page on our website, and you would join Victoria and me for key industry events and media opportunities. It wasn't everything I'd asked for, but it was more than James had ever offered before. Still, there was something missing. And my board seat? I asked. Victoria interjected, we're offering you a significant promotion and public recognition. Isn't that enough? I turned to her, maintaining my composure. Victoria, I own 40% of this company. I have voting rights for 50% of its shares. I'm not asking for a board seat as a favor. I'm asking because it's my right as a major shareholder. A right you've never exercised before, she pointed out. A right I've never needed to exercise. Before, I corrected. The company was well managed. Decisions were sound. That's changed in recent months. Victoria flushed but said nothing. James sighed. The board seat is reasonable. We'll make the necessary arrangements. And one more thing, I added. The company history on our website and in our marketing materials needs to be updated to accurately reflect my role as co-founder. Victoria opened her mouth to object, but James raised a hand to stop her. Agreed, he said. It's the truth, after all. I took a moment to consider the offer. It wasn't the complete restructuring I had proposed, but it addressed my core concerns, recognition, authority, and a voice in the company's future. More importantly, it would allow me to protect Meridian from Victoria's more impulsive decisions, while giving her the opportunity to develop the skills she needed. I accept, I said finally. With one addition, a written amendment to our operating agreement that codifies these changes and prevents any further restructuring without mutual consent. James nodded. I'll have Margaret draw up the paperwork tomorrow. Victoria was still watching me, her expression now more curious than hostile. You could have done this years ago, she said. Why now? I considered her question carefully. Because sometimes you need to lose something to realize how much it's worth fighting for. She held my gaze for a long moment, then nodded slightly, as if something finally made sense to her. I underestimated you. Yes, I agreed. You did. James looked between us, perhaps sensing a shift in the dynamic. Then we're agreed? We move forward together? We move forward together, I confirmed. As equals. The next morning, when I walked into Meridian's headquarters, the security guard who had watched me leave with my box of belongings did a double take. Ms. Chen? I thought, there's been a change of plans, Carlos, I said, smiling as I accepted the visitor badge. He automatically handed me. I'll need a new permanent ID. Yes, ma'am. I'll call HR right away. As I rode the elevator to the executive floor, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. 15 years in the shadows, building something I believed in without receiving credit. A lifetime of being underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. And now, finally, a chance to step into the light, not because someone had graciously made space for me, but because I had claimed the space that was rightfully mine. The doors opened to reveal Victoria waiting in the hallway. "Your office is ready," she said without preamble. "Dad thought you might want your old one back, but I had them prepare the corner suite instead. Better view." I studied her face, looking for signs of resentment or anger, but found only careful neutrality. "Thank you." She nodded once, professionally. "The executive team meets at 9:30. I've added you to the calendar invite." As she turned to leave, I called after her. "Victoria." She paused, looking back over her shoulder. "This can work," I said. "If we let it." A flicker of something, uncertainty, perhaps, or maybe just recognition, crossed her face. "We'll see," she said, and continued down the hall. It wasn't acceptance. It wasn't even alliance. But it was acknowledgement, the beginning of respect. And after 15 years of invisibility, it was enough to start with. James was waiting in my new office, standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. He turned as I entered, gesturing to the space around us. "Is this suitable?" he asked. I set my bag down on the desk, mahogany, substantial. With plenty of room to work. "It's fine." He nodded, then handed me a thick envelope. "The press release for your approval. The website updates are being made as we speak. And this," he pulled out a small black box, "was supposed to wait for the official announcement, but I thought you might want it now." I opened the box to find a sleek business card holder, silver with the Meridian logo engraved on one side. Inside were cards that read Sophia Chen, Executive Vice President and Co-founder. Co-founder. In print. Official. "It's a start," James said, watching my reaction. "The rest, well, that's up to us to figure out together." I ran my finger over the embossed title, feeling the weight of those words. "Yes," I agreed. "Together." When James left, I sat at my new desk, looking out at the city below. Somewhere out there, in a coffee shop or classroom or tiny apartment, was another person with potential being overlooked, another voice being silenced, another contribution being claimed by someone else. I couldn't change that reality for everyone. But I could change it for myself. And maybe, in doing so, create a little more space for others to do the same. The day Victoria Caldwell fired me, she thought she was removing an obstacle. Instead, she had removed the final barrier holding back the truth. She had no idea I was the silent partner who had helped build the company she thought was her birthright. She had no idea that in trying to erase me, she had only made me more visible. Now she knew. Now everyone would know. Not because I demanded attention or sought revenge, but because I finally understood that my silence had never protected Meridian, it had only protected those who wanted to pretend I didn't matter. I picked up the phone and dialed the extension. For the executive assistant I would now share with Victoria and James. "Helen? It's Sophia Chen. Can you please schedule a company-wide meeting for later this week? I think it's time I properly introduced myself to everyone. Power that needs to announce itself isn't real power," my grandmother had said. But sometimes, power needs to be acknowledged to be effective. Sometimes, stepping out of the shadows isn't about ego, it's about integrity. About truth. About finally claiming the space you've earned, not just for yourself but for everyone who might come after you. Victoria had fired me on her first day as COO. She had no idea I was the silent partner who could have fired her right back. But I didn't want her job. I didn't even want revenge. I wanted something far more valuable, my rightful place in the story. /artifact, now I've created the intro hook in part 1 of your new story titled CEO's Daughter Fired Me on Her First Day. She had no idea I was the silent partner. This part introduces Sophia Chen, who has been the invisible force behind Meridian Medical's success for 15 years, only to be fired by the CEO's inexperienced daughter Victoria. The news of my return to Meridian spread through the company like wildfire. By lunchtime on my first day back, my inbox was flooded with messages, some congratulatory, others confused, all curious. How had I gone from fired to executive leadership? In less than 2 weeks? What did this mean for the company? For Victoria? For the future? I answered none of them directly. Instead, I focused on preparing for the company-wide meeting scheduled for Friday afternoon. This would be my formal introduction, not as Sophia Chen, the behind-the-scenes advisor who could be dismissed on a whim, but as Sophia Chen, co-founder and executive vice president, the woman who had helped build Meridian from nothing. But first, I had more immediate concerns. The executive team meeting at 9:30 would set the tone for everything that followed. I arrived early, taking a seat at the conference table where I had sat hundreds of times before, always to the side, never at the head. Today, I chose a seat directly across from where Victoria usually sat, next to the position James would occupy. A statement without words. The executives filed in gradually, each reaction to my presence slightly different. Thomas from finance nodded respectfully. He had always valued my input on budget matters. Raji from R&D couldn't hide his smile. He had been fighting for months to get Victoria to approve his department's proposals. Elena from marketing looked cautiously optimistic. She had lost 3 team members in the past month to Victoria's restructuring. Victoria arrived exactly on time, her stride confident until she saw me. For just a moment, her step faltered. Then she recovered, taking her usual seat without acknowledging my presence. James was the last to enter, carrying a stack of folders. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "As you can see, we have some changes to discuss today. But first, let's welcome back Sophia Chen in her new role as Executive Vice President and co-founder." There was a beat of silence as the executives processed this information. Co-founder. It was the first time most of them had heard this title associated with my name. Sophia has been instrumental in building Meridian from its earliest days. James continued. Her return to the executive team represents our commitment to the company's founding principles and future growth. Victoria's expression remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened where she gripped her tablet. "Thank you, James," I said, addressing the room. "I'm looking forward to working with all of you in this new capacity. My focus will be on operational excellence and innovation, returning to the principles that made Meridian an industry leader." The meeting proceeded with routine updates from each department, but the underlying tension was palpable. Every comment seemed to carry double meaning. Every proposal felt like a test of the new power dynamics. When Victoria presented her plans for the next quarter, she avoided looking in my direction. As I mentioned last week, we'll be shifting our focus to expanding our existing product lines rather than investing heavily in new technologies. The market research suggests customers want incremental improvements, not disruptive changes. This was precisely the strategy one had argued against before she fired me. I waited until she finished before responding. "I've reviewed the market research," I said, keeping my tone conversational. "And while there's certainly value in refining our current offerings, abandoning innovation would be a mistake. Our competitors are investing heavily in next-generation technology. If we focus solely on incremental improvements, we'll find ourselves obsolete within 3 years." Victoria's jaw tightened. The research shows what customers say they want now," I interrupted gently. "Our job is to anticipate what they'll need tomorrow. That's how we built this company, by solving problems before the market fully recognized them." Several executives nodded in agreement. They remembered Meridian's history, even if Victoria didn't. "Perhaps," James interjected, "we should consider a balanced approach. Victoria's focus on improving existing products, combined with Sophia's emphasis on innovation. We don't need to choose one strategy at the expense of the other." It was a diplomatic solution, giving both of us space to claim victory. I nodded my agreement, and after a moment's hesitation, Victoria did the same. The rest of the meeting continued in similar fashion: careful negotiations, subtle repositioning, the gradual establishment of new boundaries. By the time we adjourned, everyone understood that something fundamental had changed at Meridian. The exact nature of that change was still taking shape, but its presence was undeniable. As we gathered our materials to leave, Victoria approached me directly for the first time. "My office." 10 minutes, she said quietly, then walked out without waiting for a response. I found her standing by the window when I arrived, looking out at the city below. She didn't turn when I entered. "You could have told me," she said after a moment. "About your role in the company. About your ownership stake. You let me believe you were just another employee." "Your father made that decision," I replied. "Not me." She turned then, her expression more confused than angry. "But why? Why hide something so significant?" I considered how to answer. The full truth was complicated, wrapped in layers of history, compromise, and cultural context that Victoria might not understand. "When your father and I started Meridian, the medical technology industry was conservative," I began. "Investors and clients were used to dealing with a certain type of founder. Your father believed they would be more comfortable with him as the public face of the company. Because you're a woman? Because you're Asian? Victoria's directness surprised me. Both. And because I was young, younger than you are now when we started. The combination made me an unlikely candidate for leadership in the eyes of many decision makers. That's discrimination, she said flatly. I smiled slightly. Yes. It was. And still is, in many ways. But we made a business decision. To work within those constraints rather than fight them directly. Your father became the public face. I built the company from the inside. And you were okay with that arrangement? At the time, yes. The company was struggling. We needed investor confidence, client trust. My priority was making Meridian successful, not getting public recognition. Victoria shook her head. I don't understand how you could accept being erased like that. I wasn't erased, I corrected. I was present in every strategic decision, every innovation, every success Meridian achieved. My name wasn't on the door, but my work was embedded in every aspect of the company. But no one knew. Even I didn't know, and I grew up hearing about Meridian. That statement revealed more than Victoria probably intended. She had grown up with Meridian as part of her family story, a story that apparently never included me. Your father and I had different priorities, I said carefully. He wanted to build a legacy. I wanted to solve problems that mattered. Both were valid goals, and for 15 years, our arrangement worked for both of us. Until I fired you, Victoria said, the realization dawning in her expression. Until you fired me, I agreed. Without knowing who I really was or what I had contributed. She was quiet for a moment, processing this information. So what happens now? We just pretend to get along while fighting for control behind the scenes? That would be counterproductive, I said. Meridian is facing real challenges, declining market share, stalled innovation, talent exodus. We can't afford to be distracted by internal power struggles. So you're suggesting what, a truce? I'm suggesting a partnership, I clarified. Not between you and me. Between you, your father, and me. Each bringing different strengths to the table. Each respecting the other's contributions. Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. A week ago, I was planning to reshape this company in my image. Now I'm being asked to share power with someone I didn't even know existed at the executive level. Welcome to leadership, I said. Simply. Plans change. New information emerges. The question isn't whether you can implement your original vision exactly as you imagined it. The question is whether you can adapt to create something even better than what you initially envisioned. She studied me with renewed interest. You actually believe that, don't you? That this could be better than what either of us planned individually? I do, I said. Because I've seen what Meridian can accomplish when we combine vision with experience. Your father had the vision 15 years ago. I had the operational expertise to make it real. Now you're bringing fresh perspective, new connections, different insights. If we can align those strengths instead of working against each other, there's no limit to what Meridian could become. Victoria didn't respond immediately. She returned to the window, her reflection thoughtful in the glass. Finally, she turned back to me. I can't promise I'll agree with your decisions, she said. Or that I'll suddenly embrace your vision for Meridian. I wouldn't expect you to, I replied. Disagreement isn't the problem. Dismissal is. Before you fired me, you dismissed my input without considering its merit. That's what needs to change. She nodded slowly. Fair enough. I'll listen. I can't promise more than that right now. It wasn't a wholesale commitment to partnership. But it was a beginning. A willingness to hear perspectives different from her own. For someone who had been so certain of her own rightness a week ago, it represented significant movement. That's all I'm asking for, I said. A chance to be heard. A seat at the table I helped build. As I left Victoria's office, I felt a subtle shift in the company's atmosphere. Word was spreading about my true role at Meridian. Employees who had barely noticed me before now watched with curious eyes as I passed. Some even stopped to introduce themselves, as if meeting me for the first time. In a way, they were. Sophia Chen, the quiet advisor, had been easy to overlook. Sophia Chen, co-founder and executive vice president, commanded attention simply by existing. By Wednesday, the changes were becoming more concrete. My name appeared on the company website, my biography listed alongside James and Victoria on the leadership page. The press release went out, generating a flurry of industry articles with headlines like Meridian Medical reveals hidden co-founder and the woman behind the medical tech giant. A reporter from MedTech Today even called for an interview. "We've covered Meridian for years," she explained, "but we've never heard your name associated with the company's founding. What's the story there?" I deflected gracefully. Meridian has always been a collaborative effort. Different leaders have taken the spotlight at different times, depending on the company's needs. I'm stepping into a more public role now because that's what the current chapter of our growth requires. It was diplomatic, avoiding any hint of the tensions that had brought us to this point. The reporters seemed skeptical but accepted my explanation. The resulting article was more favorable than I expected, highlighting my technical background and the innovations I had helped develop. On Thursday, I received an unexpected visit from Rajiv, our head of R&D. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, hovering in my doorway with a thick folder under his arm. "Not at all," I assured him. "What can I do for you?" He entered, closing the door behind him. "I wanted to show you something before tomorrow's meeting. Something we've been working on quietly." He opened the folder on my desk, revealing technical drawings and preliminary test results for a new dialysis system, smaller, more efficient, and significantly less expensive than our current models. "This looks promising," I said, examining the specifications. "How long have you been developing this?" "About 8 months," Rajiv admitted. "Mostly after hours. The team believed in the concept, but Victoria wouldn't approve the resources," I finished for him. He nodded. "She wanted us focused on incremental improvements to the existing product line. But this could be transformative for rural healthcare centers. The power requirements are minimal, the maintenance schedule is simplified, and the manufacturing cost is nearly 40% lower." I studied the designs more carefully. "This builds on the work we did 5 years ago with the portable units." "Exactly," Rajiv said, his enthusiasm growing. "You remember that project, how we had to balance efficiency with accessibility. This takes those principles even further." For the next hour, we discussed the technical details, potential applications, and development timeline. It was exactly the kind of innovation Meridian needed, not just an improvement on existing technology, but a reimagining of what was possible. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked finally. "Why not wait for the formal R&D review?" Rajiv hesitated. "Because we need an advocate. Someone who understands both the technical potential and the business implications. Someone who can make Victoria see that innovation isn't just about shiny new features, it's about expanding access to life-saving technology." "You want me to champion this project?" "Yes," he said simply. "The team believes in it. I believe in it. And I think you will too, once you've reviewed all the data." I smiled. "I already do. Let me handle Victoria." When Rajiv left, I sat thinking about the project and what it represented. It wasn't just about a new product, it was about Meridian's identity. Were we a company that pushed boundaries, that refused to accept limitations? Or were we becoming a cautious corporation, more concerned with quarterly profits than long-term impact? The answer seemed clear to me. But convincing Victoria would require more than technical arguments. It would require helping her see the connection between innovation and the legacy she was so eager to build. Friday morning arrived with a sense of anticipation. The company-wide meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the main auditorium. Every employee had been invited, from the executive team to the newest intern. It would be my first opportunity to address the entire company as co-founder and executive vice president. James found me in my office just before noon. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "I've been ready for 15 years, I replied. "The question is, are you ready?" He sighed. "I should have done this years ago. Acknowledged your role publicly, I mean. It was wrong to keep you in the shadows for so long." "Yes, it was," I agreed, not offering absolution too easily. "But we're here now. Moving forward." "Victoria asked me this morning why I never told her about your contributions," James said. "I didn't have a good answer." "What did you tell her?" "The truth. That I got comfortable with the arrangement. That it was easier to maintain the status quo than to challenge it. That I told myself it was a business decision when really, it was about my own ego." His honesty surprised me. "That's more self-awareness than I expected." James smiled ruefully. Nearly losing the best business partner I've ever had tends to clarify one's thinking. Victoria forcing you out was a wake-up call. For both of us, I think. Speaking of Victoria, I said, has she mentioned the company meeting to you? How? She's feeling about it? Nervous, James admitted. She's used to being the heir apparent, the next generation of leadership. Now she has to share that spotlight. It's an adjustment. For all of us, I agreed. But necessary. As 2 p.m. approached, I made my way to the auditorium. Employees were already filling the seats, an undercurrent of excitement in their conversations. Many nodded or smiled as I passed, acknowledgments that would have been unthinkable 2 weeks ago. Backstage, I found James and Victoria in quiet conversation. They fell silent as I approached. Quite a turnout, I observed. Looks like the whole company is here. They're curious, Victoria said. This isn't exactly a normal situation. No, I agreed. But it's an opportunity to set a new course. Together. She met my gaze, something like respect flickering in her expression. We'll see. The meeting began with James welcoming everyone and acknowledging the unusual circumstances. Many of you have heard the announcement about Sophia Chen's new role as Executive Vice President and co-founder. Today, we want to provide context for this change and share our vision for Meridian's future. He proceeded to tell the story of Meridian's founding, the complete version this time, including my involvement from the beginning. He described how I had restructured the failing company, secured the critical patents, and developed the manufacturing processes that made our technology accessible. Sophia has been the backbone of Meridian for 15 years, he said. While I was the public face, she was the operational force that turned our vision into reality. Today, we're acknowledging that partnership formally and expanding our leadership team to meet the challenges ahead. When James finished, Victoria stepped forward. Her expression was composed, professional, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. When I joined Meridian as COO, she began, I thought I understood this company. I grew up hearing about its successes, its challenges, its growth. What I didn't hear, what I didn't know, was the full story of who built it. She paused, glancing briefly in my direction. That was a significant oversight. One that led to decisions based on incomplete information. As leaders, we have a responsibility to seek the truth, even when, especially when, it challenges our assumptions. It was as close to a public apology as Victoria could manage, and I respected her for it. Admitting error, even obliquely, couldn't have been easy for someone so accustomed to projecting confidence. Moving forward, she continued, Meridian's leadership will combine established expertise with fresh perspective. My father's vision, Sophia's operational excellence, and my focus on market expansion. Together, we will build on Meridian's legacy of innovation and accessibility. When it was my turn to speak, I approached the podium with a strange sense of déjà vu. How many times had I prepared remarks for James to deliver? How many company announcements had I crafted, only to watch someone else present them? Now, finally, I was speaking as myself, in my own voice, with my own authority. Thank you for being here today, I began. For many of you, this is the first time we've been formally introduced, despite working together for years. That's changing today, not because of title or position, but because Meridian is entering a new chapter, one that requires all of us to bring our full selves to the work ahead. I spoke about Meridian's founding principles, innovation, accessibility, impact. About how our technology had transformed lives in communities often overlooked by the medical establishment. About the responsibility we had to continue pushing boundaries, refusing to accept that good enough was ever truly good enough when people's health was at stake. Some of you may be wondering what these leadership changes mean for you, for your teams, for your projects, I acknowledged. The honest answer is that some things will change. We will be renewing our commitment to innovation, to taking calculated risks, to pursuing ideas that might seem improbable but have the potential to be transformative. I glanced at Rajiv in the front row, who nodded slightly. At the same time, I continued, we will build on the strengths that have made Meridian successful, our attention to quality, our focus on user experience, our commitment to making technology accessible to all communities, not just those with the most resources. As I concluded my remarks, I looked out at the assembled employees, some familiar faces, many I knew only in passing, others complete strangers despite sharing the same workplace for years. Meridian's story has always been about challenging assumptions, I said. About refusing to accept that things must remain as they are simply because that's how they've always been. Today, we're applying that principle to ourselves. Reimagining what leadership looks like at Meridian. Recognizing that the best solutions come from diverse perspectives, from collaboration, from the courage to speak truth even when it's uncomfortable. I paused, looking directly at Victoria and then James. I'm honored to step into this new role alongside James and Victoria Caldwell. Together, we will write Meridian's next chapter, one worthy of the company's history and the people who make its work possible. Thank you. The applause that followed was genuine, enthusiastic, perhaps tinged with relief. Employees had sensed the tension of the past months, had witnessed the effects of Victoria's restructuring and the subsequent uncertainty. Now they had clarity, not just about the leadership structure, but about the company's direction. After the meeting, as employees filtered back to their departments, I found myself surrounded by people eager to introduce themselves, to share ideas, to express support. It was overwhelming in its novelty, this sudden visibility after years of operating in the background. Later that evening, as the office emptied and the day's events settled into perspective, I stood at the window of my new office, looking out at the city lights coming on against the darkening sky. Victoria appeared in the doorway, hesitating. Before knocking lightly on the frame. "Do you have a minute?" she asked. I gestured to the chairs by the window. "Of course." She sat, her professional demeanor softening slightly in the privacy of the empty office. "That was a good speech. Authentic." "Thank you," I said. "Yours was brave." She smiled slightly. "Hardly. I didn't actually apologize for firing you." "No," I agreed. "But you acknowledged there was information you didn't have. That's a start." Victoria was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city. "My father told me something interesting this afternoon. He said that when they were first seeking investors for Meridian, you were the one who convinced them. Not him. You. That you explained the technology so clearly, addressed their concerns so effectively, that they were ready to invest before he even made his pitch." I remembered that meeting, 5 nervous investors, James stumbling through his presentation, me stepping in with technical specifications and market projections when it became clear he was losing them. "Your father is a visionary," I said. "But sometimes visionaries need partners who can translate that vision into language others can understand." "Is that how you see yourself? As a translator?" I considered the question. "No. I'm a builder. I take ideas, sometimes mine, sometimes others, and I build them into reality. Your father imagined a company that could transform medical care. I built it, piece by piece, decision by decision, year by year. And now? What are you building now?" "A bridge," I said after a moment. "Between what Meridian has been and what it could become. Between your father's legacy and your future. Between innovation and accessibility." Victoria looked at me with new understanding. "You really do care about this company, don't you? It's not just about recognition or power for you." "It never was," I said simply. "If all I wanted was recognition, I would have left years ago. Started my own company. Put my name front and center. But Meridian isn't just a company to me. It's a mission. A purpose. Making life-saving technology available to people who need it most." She nodded slowly. "I think I'm starting to understand why my father trusted you all these years. Even if he didn't always acknowledge that trust publicly." It was the closest thing to acceptance I had heard from Victoria, an acknowledgement not just of my position, but of my value to Meridian. Of the legitimacy of my place in the company's past and future. "We should look at Rajiv's new project together," I suggested. "The rural dialysis system. I think you'll be impressed by what the team has developed." "I'd like that," she said, rising to leave. At the door, she paused. "For what it's worth, I was wrong about you. About a lot of things. But especially about you." After she left, I remained by the window, watching the city transform as daylight faded completely and buildings became constellations of light against the night sky. 15 years ago, James and I had stood at a different window, looking out at a small office park where Meridian was just one struggling startup among many. One day, he had promised, "We'll have a view from the top." He had meant it literally, a corner office in a downtown high-rise, the physical manifestation of success. But sitting here now, I realized there were many kinds of views from the top. The one I valued most wasn't about altitude or corner offices. It was about perspective, the ability to see clearly what mattered, what didn't, and how to build a path between the two. Victoria had fired me because she couldn't see my value. She had no idea I was the silent partner who had helped build everything she thought was her inheritance. Now she was beginning to see, not just who I was, but what I could help her become. That was the view worth fighting for. Not recognition for its own sake, but the opportunity to continue the work that had always mattered most, building something that made a difference. Now, finally, I could do that work in the light, my name attached to my contributions, my voice heard in the rooms where decisions were made. The silent partner was silent no more. And Meridian would be better for it. /artifact, the news of my return to Meridian spread through the company like wildfire. By lunchtime on my first day back, my inbox was flooded with messages, some congratulatory, others confused, all curious. How had I gone from fired to executive leadership in less than 2 weeks? What did this mean for the company? For Victoria? For the future? I answered none of them directly. Instead, I focused on preparing for the company-wide meeting scheduled for Friday afternoon. This would be my formal introduction, not as Sophia Chen, the behind-the-scenes advisor who could be dismissed on a whim, but as Sophia Chen, co-founder and executive vice president, the woman who had helped build Meridian from nothing. But first, I had more immediate concerns. The executive team meeting at 9:30 would set the tone for everything that followed. I arrived early, taking a seat at the conference table where I had sat hundreds of times before, always to the side, never at the head. Today, I chose a seat directly across from where Victoria usually sat, next to the position James would occupy. A statement without words. The executives filed in gradually, each reaction to my presence slightly different. Thomas from finance nodded respectfully. He had always valued my input on budget matters. Raji from R&D couldn't hide his smile. He had been fighting for months to get Victoria to approve his department's proposals. Elena from marketing looked cautiously optimistic. She had lost 3 team members in the past month to Victoria's restructuring. Victoria arrived exactly on time, her stride confident until she saw me. For just a moment, her step faltered. Then she recovered, taking her usual seat without acknowledging my presence. James was the last to enter, carrying a stack of folders. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "As you can see, we have some changes to discuss today. But first, let's welcome back Sophia Chen in her new role as Executive Vice President and co-founder." There was a beat of silence as the executives processed this information. Co-founder. It was the first time most of them had heard this title associated with my name. Sophia has been instrumental in building Meridian from its earliest days. James continued. Her return to the executive team represents our commitment to the company's founding principles and future growth. Victoria's expression remained impassive, but her knuckles whitened where she gripped her tablet. "Thank you, James," I said, addressing the room. "I'm looking forward to working with all of you in this new capacity. My focus will be on operational excellence and innovation, returning to the principles that made Meridian an industry leader." The meeting proceeded with routine updates from each department, but the underlying tension was palpable. Every comment seemed to carry double meaning. Every proposal felt like a test of the new power dynamics. When Victoria presented her plans for the next quarter, she avoided looking in my direction. "As I mentioned last week, we'll be shifting our focus to expanding our existing product lines rather than investing heavily in new technologies. The market research suggests customers want incremental improvements, not disruptive changes." This was precisely the strategy one had argued against before she fired me. I waited until she finished before responding. "I've reviewed the market research," I said, keeping my tone conversational. "And while there's certainly value in refining our current offerings, abandoning innovation would be a mistake. Our competitors are investing heavily in next-generation technology. If we focus solely on incremental improvements, we'll find ourselves obsolete within 3 years. Victoria's jaw tightened. The research shows what customers say they want now," I interrupted gently. "Our job is to anticipate what they'll need tomorrow. That's how we built this company, by solving problems before the market fully recognized them." Several executives nodded in agreement. They remembered Meridian's history, even if Victoria didn't. "Perhaps," James interjected, "we should consider a balanced approach. Victoria's focus on improving existing products, combined with Sophia's emphasis on innovation. We don't need to choose one strategy at the expense of the other. It was a diplomatic solution, giving both of us space to claim victory. I nodded my agreement, and after a moment's hesitation, Victoria did the same. The rest of the meeting continued in similar fashion: careful negotiations, subtle repositioning, the gradual establishment of new boundaries. By the time we adjourned, everyone understood that something fundamental had changed at Meridian. The exact nature of that change was still taking shape, but its presence was undeniable. As we gathered our materials to leave, Victoria approached me directly for the first time. "My office." 10 minutes, she said quietly, then walked out without waiting for a response. I found her standing by the window when I arrived, looking out at the city below. She didn't turn when I entered. "You could have told me," she said after a moment. "About your role in the company. About your ownership stake. You let me believe you were just another employee." "Your father made that decision," I replied. "Not me." She turned then, her expression more confused than angry. "But why? Why hide something so significant?" I considered how to answer. The full truth was complicated, wrapped in layers of history, compromise, and cultural context that Victoria might not understand. "When your father and I started Meridian, the medical technology industry was conservative," I began. "Investors and clients were used to dealing with a certain type of founder. Your father believed they would be more comfortable with him as the public face of the company. Because you're a woman? Because you're Asian?" Victoria's directness surprised me. "Both. And because I was young, younger than you are now when we started. The combination made me an unlikely candidate for leadership in the eyes of many decision-makers." "That's discrimination," she said flatly. I smiled slightly. "Yes. It was. And still is, in many ways. But we made a business decision to work within those constraints rather than fight them directly. Your father became the public face. I built the company from the inside. And you were okay with that arrangement?" "At the time, yes. The company was struggling. We needed investor confidence, client trust. My priority was making Meridian successful, not getting public recognition." Victoria shook her head. "I don't understand how you could accept being erased like that." "I wasn't erased," I corrected. "I was present in every strategic decision, every innovation, every success Meridian achieved. My name wasn't on the door, but my work was embedded in every aspect of the company. But no one knew. Even I didn't know, and I grew up hearing about Meridian." That statement revealed more than Victoria probably intended. She had grown up with Meridian as part of her family story, a story that apparently never included me. "Your father and I had different priorities," I said carefully. "He wanted to build a legacy. I wanted to solve problems that mattered. Both were valid goals, and for 15 years, our arrangement worked for both of us. Until I fired you," Victoria said, the realization dawning in her expression. "Until you fired me," I agreed. Without knowing who I really was or what I had contributed. She was quiet for a moment, processing this information. "So what happens now? We just pretend to get along while fighting for control behind the scenes?" "That would be counterproductive," I said. "Meridian is facing real challenges: declining market share, stalled innovation, talent exodus. We can't afford to be distracted by internal power struggles." "So you're suggesting what, a truce?" "I'm suggesting a partnership," I clarified. "Not between you and me. Between you, your father, and me. Each bringing different strengths to the table. Each respecting the other's contributions." Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A week ago, I was planning to reshape this company in my image. Now I'm being asked to share power with someone I didn't even know existed at the executive level." "Welcome to leadership," I said simply. "Plans change. New information emerges. The question isn't whether you can implement your original vision exactly as you imagined it. The question is whether you can adapt to create something even better than what you initially envisioned." She studied me with renewed interest. "You actually believe that, don't you? That this could be better than what either of us planned individually?" "I do," I said. "Because I've seen what Meridian can accomplish when we combine vision with experience. Your father had the vision 15 years ago. I had the operational expertise to make it real. Now you're bringing fresh perspective, new connections, different insights. If we can align those strengths instead of working against each other, there's no limit to what Meridian could become." Victoria didn't respond immediately. She returned to the window, her reflection thoughtful in the glass. Finally, she turned back to me. I can't promise I'll agree with your decisions, she said. Or that I'll suddenly embrace your vision for Meridian. I wouldn't expect you to, I replied. Disagreement isn't the problem. Dismissal is. Before you fired me, you dismissed my input without considering its merit. That's what needs to change. She nodded slowly. Fair enough. I'll listen. I can't promise more than that right now. It wasn't a wholesale commitment to partnership. But it was a beginning. A willingness to hear perspectives different from her own. For someone who had been so certain of her own rightness a week ago, it represented significant movement. That's all I'm asking for, I said. A chance to be heard. A seat at the table I helped build. As I left Victoria's office, I felt a subtle shift in the company's atmosphere. Word was spreading about my true role at Meridian. Employees who had barely noticed me before now watched with curious eyes as I passed. Some even stopped to introduce themselves, as if meeting me for the first time. In a way, they were. Sophia Chen, the quiet advisor, had been easy to overlook. Sophia Chen, co-founder and executive vice president, commanded attention simply by existing. By Wednesday, the changes were becoming more concrete. My name appeared on the company website, my biography listed alongside James and Victoria on the leadership page. The press release went out, generating a flurry of industry articles with headlines like Meridian Medical 2 weeks after my return to Meridian. The initial shock had given way to a new rhythm. My office became a hub of activity. People who had never sought my input before now lined up outside my door. Some came with genuine questions about projects and strategies. Others came simply to introduce themselves, to establish a connection with the newly revealed co-founder. A few came to share stories of their own experiences being overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed. Each conversation reinforced what I had always believed: Meridian's greatest strength wasn't its technology or its market position, but its people. People who cared deeply about their work, who believed in the company's mission, who had ideas and insights that had gone unheard. During Victoria's brief but tumultuous tenure as COO, one morning, I arrived to find Elena from marketing waiting outside my office, a thick portfolio tucked under her arm and determination in her eyes. "Do you have a few minutes?" she asked as I unlocked my door. "There's something I need to show you." Inside, she spread the contents of her portfolio across my desk: market research, competitor analyses, concept sketches for a new brand identity. "Victoria rejected this last month," Elena explained. "Said it was too radical a departure from our established image. But I think it's exactly what Meridian needs right now." I examined the materials carefully. Elena's team had reimagined Meridian's branding to emphasize accessibility and innovation rather than technical superiority, a subtle but significant shift that aligned perfectly with our renewed focus on serving underserved communities. "This is excellent work," I said. "Why was it rejected?" Elena hesitated. Victoria felt it didn't project enough authority. She wanted something that emphasized Meridian's status as an industry leader. I nodded, understanding immediately. Victoria had been focused on how Meridian was perceived by competitors and investors, entities that valued dominance and market share. Elena's approach centered on how we were perceived by the healthcare providers and patients we served, people who valued solutions and accessibility. "I'd like to revisit this," I said. "Can you prepare a presentation for the executive team meeting next week? Include data on how our current customers perceive our brand versus how potential customers in rural and underserved markets view us." Elena's face lit up. "Absolutely. I've already gathered most of that research." Victoria just never looked at it. As she gathered her materials, Elena paused. "Can I ask you something? Something personal?" "Of course. How did you do it? Stay invisible for so long while building something so significant? Didn't it hurt?" The question caught me off guard with its directness. I considered how to answer. "Yes," I said finally. "It hurt. But I made a choice to prioritize the work over recognition. To value impact over acknowledgement. Was it the right choice? I'm not sure anymore. But it was the choice that made sense to me at the time." Elena nodded slowly. "I think I understand. Sometimes we make compromises to achieve something larger than ourselves. The key," I added, "is recognizing when those compromises no longer serve the greater purpose. When invisibility becomes an obstacle rather than a strategy." After Elena left, I thought about her question and my answer. Had I been noble in accepting my behind-the-scenes role for so long? Or had I been complicit in my own erasure? Perhaps both were true simultaneously, a contradiction I was still learning to reconcile. The next day, I received an unexpected email from Dr. Sarah Blackwell, the Chief Medical Officer at Northern Healthcare, one of Meridian's largest clients and the one whose contract Victoria had failed to renegotiate properly. Heard about the changes at Meridian, she wrote. Interesting development. I always wondered who was behind the seamless implementation of your systems. Now I know. Would love to catch up over coffee if you're available. We met at a small cafe near Northern's headquarters, away from the corporate formality of either of our offices. Sarah was direct, as physicians often are. So you're the one who designed the integration protocols, she said after we'd exchanged pleasantries. James always took credit for that. I smiled. James is excellent at explaining the value of our technology. The technical details are more my domain. Which explains why no one could answer my questions at the last contract renewal, Sarah said dryly. Victoria was very enthusiastic but remarkably vague when it came to specifics. About that renewal, I began. I believe there may have been a misunderstanding about Northern's expectations. Sarah laughed. You mean how we'd budgeted for a significant price increase and were shocked when none materialized? That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a gift horse we weren't about to examine too closely. I leaned forward slightly. Northern has been a valued partner since Meridian's earliest days. We want our pricing to be fair, to you and to us. Perhaps we should revisit that agreement, with an eye toward a more equitable arrangement that includes expanded services to balance any price adjustments. Sarah studied me with new interest. You're suggesting we pay more but get more in return. I'm suggesting we structure our partnership to reflect its true value to both organizations. Northern gains access to innovation that directly improves patient outcomes. Meridian receives fair compensation for that innovation. By the time our coffee was finished, we had outlined the framework for a new agreement, one that increased Northern's costs by 12% but included priority access to the rural dialysis system Rajiv's team was developing, along with specialized training for Northern staff. I like working with someone who understands both the technology and its real-world application, Sarah said as we parted. Let's not wait for the next contract renewal to have these conversations. I returned to Meridian energized by the interaction. This was what I had missed during my years in the background, direct engagement with the people who used our technology, unfiltered by James's charm or Victoria's ambition. The ability to represent Meridian as myself, with my own voice and perspective. That afternoon, I had my weekly one-on-one with James. These meetings had once been casual, unofficial strategy sessions where I provided input that he would then present as his own. Now they were formal check-ins between co-leaders, documented in the company calendar for all to see. How was your meeting with Sarah Blackwell? He asked as I settled into the chair across from his desk. Productive, I replied. We're renegotiating the Northern contract. 12% increase, plus expanded services and priority access to the rural dialysis system. James raised his eyebrows. Victoria won't be happy about that. She considered the Northern deal a win. It wasn't a win, James. It was a missed opportunity. We left money on the table and undervalued our technology. He sighed. I know. But Victoria was so proud of maintaining the relationship without any friction. She saw it as proof that her approach was working. Her approach was costing us millions, I pointed out. Not just with Northern, but across our client base. We can't afford that kind of win right now. James was quiet for a moment. Victoria is struggling with the new dynamic, he said finally. She feels sidelined. I chose my next words carefully. Victoria sidelined herself by refusing to listen to experienced voices. By dismissing expertise that didn't align with her preconceptions. By firing people who challenged her vision instead of incorporating their insights to strengthen it. People like you, James said quietly. Yes, I acknowledged. People like me. But also Thomas from finance, who tried to warn her about the revenue implications of her pricing strategy. And half of Elena's marketing team, who had valuable perspectives on how our brand is perceived in different markets. And the 3 senior engineers who left R&D because their innovation proposals were repeatedly rejected. James winced. I didn't realize the exodus was that significant. Because Victoria didn't tell you, I said gently. she presented it as restructuring and efficiency improvements. But it was really about surrounding herself with people who wouldn't challenge her decisions. What do you suggest? James asked, and I realized this was a significant moment. James Caldwell, the face of Meridian for 15 years, asking directly for my guidance rather than my behind-the-scenes support. Victoria needs to find her place in the new Meridian, I said. Not as your heir apparent or my adversary, but as a leader with her own unique contribution to make. She has strengths, client relationships, market awareness, strategic thinking. But she needs to apply those strengths in collaboration with others, not in isolation. And how do we help her see that? By giving her a challenge that requires collaboration to succeed. Something she can't accomplish alone, but where her contribution is essential. James considered this. What did you have in mind? The Rural Healthcare Initiative, I suggested. It combines technology development, market expansion, and social impact. It requires input from R&D, marketing, finance, and client services. No single department, and no single leader, can make it successful alone. And Victoria's role would be? Leading the client engagement strategy, identifying pilot sites, building relationships with regional healthcare systems, developing the value proposition for different market segments. James nodded slowly, playing to her strengths while requiring her to work with teams she's previously dismissed. Exactly, I said. It's not punishment. It's an opportunity to prove herself in a context where success benefits everyone. The next day, James called Victoria and me into his office to propose the Rural Healthcare Initiative as a company-wide priority, with Victoria leading the client engagement strategy and me overseeing the technology development. Victoria's initial response was cautious. She recognized both the opportunity and the constraint in the assignment. I'll need resources, she said. A dedicated team, travel budget, authority to make commitments to potential partners. You'll have them, James assured her. Within parameters that Sophia and I will establish together. Victoria glanced at me, a flicker of the old resentment in her eyes, but it faded quickly. I'd like Elena from marketing on my team, she said. Her research on rural healthcare systems is impressive. I hid my surprise at this request. The fact that Victoria was willing to work with Elena, whose ideas she had previously rejected, suggested she was already adapting to the new reality. Elena would be an excellent choice, I agreed. I'll speak with her today. As the meeting concluded, Victoria lingered behind. This is a test, isn't it? She asked once James had left. To see if I can play well with others. It's an opportunity, I corrected. To demonstrate that your skills are valuable in the right context. To contribute meaningfully to Meridian's future. While keeping me contained, she noted. Limited in my authority, dependent on collaboration. Leadership is always about collaboration, Victoria. Always about recognizing that no single perspective, not mine, not your father's, not yours, contains the complete truth. The sooner you embrace that reality, the sooner you'll become the leader Meridian needs you to be. She considered this, her expression thoughtful rather than defensive. I still believe in my vision for this company, she said finally. In modernizing our approach, expanding our market reach, streamlining our operations. Those are worthy goals, I acknowledged. The question isn't whether to pursue them, but how. Victoria's response surprised me. Then I'll need your input on the client engagement strategy. Your experience with these markets, with the technology's capabilities and limitations. I can't afford to make promises we can't keep. It was the first time she had directly asked for my expertise, acknowledged that my knowledge might be valuable to her success. A small step, but a significant one. I'm happy to advise, I said. That's what partners do. The Rural Healthcare Initiative quickly became a focal point for Meridian, galvanizing teams that had been demoralized by Victoria's previous leadership. Rajiv's R&D group accelerated development of the portable dialysis system. Elena's marketing team crafted messaging that emphasized accessibility and impact rather than technical specifications. Thomas from finance developed pricing models that balanced profitability with affordability for resource-constrained healthcare providers. And Victoria surprised everyone, perhaps even herself, with her effectiveness in building relationships with potential partners. Her confidence and articulation, once perceived as arrogance when applied internally, became assets when directed outward. Healthcare administrators responded to her conviction, her clear vision of how Meridian's technology could transform their capabilities. 3 weeks into the initiative, Victoria requested a meeting with me. She arrived with a detailed presentation, potential pilot sites, partner profiles, implementation timelines. These 5 healthcare systems are ready to commit, she explained, highlighting regions across the country. But they have specific requirements we need to address. She proceeded to outline the technical modifications, pricing considerations, and support services each partner would need. Her analysis was thorough, her recommendations practical. "This is impressive work," I said when she finished. "You've identified exactly the kind of partners we need for the initial phase." Victoria nodded, accepting the praise without her usual defensiveness. "I've also identified potential obstacles," she continued. "Regulatory hurdles in 2 states, reimbursement challenges with certain insurance providers, training requirements for rural clinics with limited staff." She wasn't just selling an opportunity, she was presenting a complete picture, acknowledging complexities rather than glossing over them. It was the approach of a mature leader, not an ambitious heir. "How can I help address these obstacles?" I asked. Victoria hesitated only briefly. "I need your expertise on the regulatory issues. Your history navigating similar challenges with earlier products. And I need Rajiv's team to prioritize the modifications for the first pilot site." "Consider it done," I said. "Anything else?" She met my gaze directly. "Yes. I'd like you to join me for the presentation to our first pilot partner next week. Northern Healthcare has a rural clinic initiative that aligns perfectly with our goals. Dr. Blackwell specifically requested your presence." I smiled, wondering if Victoria knew about my coffee meeting with Sarah. "I'd be happy to join you." The presentation to Northern Healthcare marked a turning point in Victoria's relationship with Meridian, and with me. We stood together before Sarah Blackwell and her executive team, presenting a unified vision of how our technology could transform healthcare delivery in underserved communities. Victoria handled the strategic overview and business case. I addressed the technical specifications and implementation requirements. We fielded questions as a team, each deferring to the other's expertise when appropriate. "I'm impressed," Sarah said afterward. "Not just with the technology, which is remarkable, but with the clarity of your shared vision. This is a different Meridian than the one I've worked with in the past." Victoria glanced at me before responding. "We're evolving," she said simply. "Building on our strengths while addressing our blind spots. This initiative represents the best of what Meridian has been and what we're becoming." It was a gracious answer, acknowledging both continuity and change. I couldn't have phrased it better myself. On the drive back to Meridian, Victoria was unusually reflective. "I've been thinking about what you said," she began. "About leadership being collaborative. About no single perspective containing the complete truth. And?" I prompted when she fell silent. "And I'm starting to understand what you meant. Today, with Northern, we were more effective together than either of us would have been alone. My strategic vision, your technical expertise. Combined, not competing. That's the essence of true partnership," I agreed. "Different strengths. Aligned toward a common goal." Victoria nodded slowly. "I always thought leadership was about having the right answers. About being the smartest person in the room. It's actually about asking the right questions," I suggested. "And creating space for others to contribute their expertise to the answers. Is that how you led? From behind the scenes all those years?" I considered the question. "In some ways, yes. I asked questions that guided decisions without claiming ownership of them. I influenced direction without controlling it explicitly. It was effective, to a point. But ultimately limiting, for me and for Meridian. Because sometimes leadership requires visibility," Victoria said, surprising me with her insight. "Sometimes the example you set is as important as the decisions you make." We drove in silence for a while, the implication of her words settling between us. Victoria had been raised to value visibility, to expect recognition, to assume leadership meant standing in the spotlight. I had accepted invisibility, working in the shadows, influencing without acknowledgement. Both approaches had strengths and limitations. Both had shaped Meridian in different ways. "We make an unlikely team," Victoria said finally as we approached the Meridian building. "The air and the hidden architect. The voice and the vision. Unlikely but complementary," I suggested. "If we choose to be." The Rural Healthcare Initiative continued to gain momentum over the following weeks. Northern Healthcare signed on as our first official partner, followed quickly by regional systems in 3 states. Victoria's client engagement team expanded, incorporating members from multiple departments. Rajiv's R&D group finalized the portable dialysis system prototype, incorporating feedback from healthcare providers in rural communities. 1 month after my return to Meridian, James called an executive meeting to review progress. The boardroom was filled with department heads and project leaders, the atmosphere charged with an energy that had been missing during Victoria's brief tenure as COO. James opened the meeting with an announcement. Before we begin, I want to share some news. The Healthcare Innovation Awards Committee has selected Meridian's Rural Healthcare Initiative as a finalist for this year's Impact Award. They were particularly impressed by our collaborative approach, bringing together technology innovation and on-the-ground implementation. A murmur of excitement spread through the room. The Impact Award was one of the industry's most prestigious recognitions, celebrating projects that transformed healthcare delivery in meaningful ways. The committee has requested that Meridian's leadership team present the initiative at next month's award ceremony, James continued. Specifically, they've asked for Victoria and Sophia to lead the presentation, with support from key team members. Victoria and I exchanged glances across the table. This would be our first major public appearance together, a symbolic representation of Meridian's new leadership structure. I think that's appropriate, James added. This initiative represents the best of both your contributions to Meridian. Victoria's strategic vision and relationship building. Sophia's technical expertise and operational excellence. Together, creating something neither could have achieved alone. The meeting proceeded with updates from each department, but the award nomination remained at the forefront of everyone's thoughts. For Meridian, it represented external validation of our new direction. For Victoria and me, it represented a public acknowledgement of our evolving partnership. After the meeting, Victoria approached me in the hallway. We should discuss the presentation, she said. How we want to structure it, what aspects to emphasize. I agree, I replied. But first, I wanted to acknowledge your work on this initiative. The partnerships you've secured, the implementation strategy you've developed, they're exceptional. You've proven yourself in ways that matter. Victoria seemed momentarily caught off guard by the praise. Thank you, she said simply. That means more than you might expect. We agreed to meet the following day to plan our presentation. When she arrived at my office, Victoria brought not just her notes but a surprising proposition. I've been thinking about how to tell the story of this initiative, she began. And I believe we need to start with the truth about Meridian itself. About its founding, its evolution, and the partnership that has shaped it from the beginning. You want to publicly acknowledge my role as co-founder, I said, understanding immediately. Yes, Victoria confirmed. Not just as part of this initiative, but as a fundamental truth about Meridian's history. The company was built on a partnership between you and my father, a partnership that was hidden for too long. If we're going to talk about collaboration as central to our approach, we need to model it in how we present ourselves. It was a significant concession from someone who had once fired me without a second thought. More than that, it was an acknowledgement that Meridian's story wasn't just about the Caldwell family legacy, it was about the power of diverse contributions coming together to create something greater than any individual could achieve alone. I appreciate that, I said carefully. But the presentation should focus on the initiative itself, not on correcting historical narratives. Victoria shook her head. The two are connected. The Rural Healthcare Initiative works because it combines different perspectives, different strengths. Just like Meridian itself works best when it acknowledges and leverages the full range of its leadership capabilities. She leaned forward, unusually earnest. When I fired you, I thought I was simplifying the company's structure, removing an obstacle to my vision. I was wrong. I wasn't removing an obstacle, I was dismantling a foundation. One I didn't even know existed because it had been kept hidden for so long. It was the most direct acknowledgement she had made of her mistake, and of the larger mistake that had preceded it, the erasure of my contributions from Meridian's official history. The award presentation is an opportunity, Victoria continued, to introduce Meridian as it truly is. As it always should have been presented. A company built on partnership, on complementary strengths, on shared vision with diverse implementation. I studied her face, looking for signs of the old Victoria, the calculating ambition, the focus on personal advancement rather than collective success. I found instead a leader beginning to understand that her greatest strength might lie not in commanding alone but in connecting diverse contributions toward a common goal. All right, I agreed. We tell the full story. Not just of the initiative, but of Meridian itself. Victoria smiled, genuine relief in her expression. Thank you for giving me another chance to get this right. As we began planning the presentation, I realized that Victoria's proposal represented something I had never truly expected, not just acknowledgement of my role, but integration of that role into Meridian's public identity. Not just a seat at the table, but recognition that I had helped build the table itself. For 15 years, I had been the silent partner, the hidden architect, the woman whose contributions were essential but unacknowledged. Now, through an unexpected series of events, being fired by the CEO's daughter who had no idea I was the silent partner, I had found my voice, my visibility, my rightful place in the company I had helped create. And in doing so, I had helped Victoria find her place as well, not as her father's replacement or my adversary, but as a leader with her own unique contribution to make. Different from mine, different from James's, but valuable in its own right. When aligned with our shared purpose. The day Victoria Caldwell fired me, she thought she was removing an obstacle to her vision. Instead, she had set in motion a transformation that would ultimately strengthen Meridian in ways none of us could have predicted. She had no idea I was the silent partner who had helped build the company she thought was her birthright. But now that she knew, we were building something even more valuable together, a future worthy of Meridian's true legacy, now finally visible to all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.